China's foreign minister is defending proposed changes to Hong Kong's electoral system. Wang Yi says they're necessary to maintain the territory's long-term stability.
Improving Hong Kong's election system and implementing the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong is necessary to promote the one country, two systems policy.
China's leadership under President Xi Jinping had earlier revealed a plan to reform Hong Kong's electoral rules, citing clear loopholes and deficiencies. China is expected to adopt the proposed reforms next Thursday, the final day of the National People's Congress. The country's state-run media reported that Vice Premier Hang Zheng met Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam on Saturday. He urged Lam to continue carrying out electoral reforms. Beijing's proposed changes are seen as an attempt to eliminate the influence of pro-democracy politicians in Hong Kong. In Myanmar, authorities have exhumed the body of a 19-year-old woman who was shot dead during an anti-coup protest in order to conduct an autopsy. People are criticizing the exhumation on social media. Jae Sin was shot in the head during a demonstration in Mandalay on Wednesday. A witness says she was giving instructions to a crowd of demonstrators from its front line facing off against police at the time of the shooting. Jae Sin has since become a symbol of the protest movement. Her body was buried in a cemetery in the suburbs of Mandalay. State-run television reported that police unearthed her body with permission from a court and carried out a surgical investigation. The television report says that a piece of lead found in the back of her head was different from the bullets used by police. It also said she was not shot from the direction of the police. Social media comments claim no one will believe such a false account of what happened, with some describing the act as horrific. Others say even a buried body is not safe under a dictatorship. One town in northeastern Japan that was hit hard by the 2011 tsunami has completed evacuation routes, so lives will be saved if disaster strikes again.
I'm so glad they have the new escape route. When a tsunami is coming, every second counts.
Stairs leading to higher ground were open Saturday, so residents of Otsuchi could practice evacuating. Some people had no choice but to climb up to a highway 10 years ago. That experience prompted the Land and Infrastructure Ministry to build stairs as part of better evacuation routes.
This is only the start. Now we have the stairs. We need to use them for evacuation drills.
The town in Iwate Prefecture was devastated by the 2011 tsunami, and many residents lost their lives. Much of the coverage of the past decade has focused on the people most impacted by the disaster in Fukushima Prefecture. Many of them had to abandon their homes. Our next report looks at someone who moved to Fukushima, motivated by a personal sense of responsibility. NHK World's Aizawa Yuko has the story.
Nuclear power is something Kino Masato thought he understood.
Before the disaster, I explained to residents that an accident like Chernobyl could not occur in Japan. But then it did. I was stunned because I was obsessed with this safety myth, and it was a very shocking event for me as an expert.
Kino is a bureaucrat for the ministry that promotes nuclear policy in Japan. He is currently in charge of decommissioning the Fukushima Daiichi power plant, the site of the nuclear accident. He was dispatched there immediately after the meltdown, which occurred 20 years into his career.
As someone who has studied nuclear power, I have a responsibility to Fukushima. I don't know how much I can do, but I have a desire to do my best to rebuild and decommission in Fukushima.
But his presence over the last 10 years hasn't always been well received by people who live there. Part of his mission involves attending meetings to explain the accident and the government's policies to residents. He says he faces criticism from people who haven't been able to return to their homes and can't even enter the area to look for missing loved ones.
The residents say things like, "You guys from the government come to Fukushima for an hour or 2 hours, explain things, and then go back to Tokyo. They have told me I should live in Fukushima to really understand."
Every year, he writes to the ministry, pleading his case to stay in the prefecture, and gradually he has become a part of the community. One resident who has come around to Kino is Kimura Norio. He lost his father, wife, and daughter in the tsunami. His house is in a no-entry zone. Kimura was surprised that Kino has taken young officials to listen to him because he is critical of nuclear power and the government.
From Kino's standpoint as a government official, I think it's a little strange, but I'm grateful for his work. Because of him, I can tell my story to young bureaucrats who will be responsible for the future policy of this country. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Kino's most pressing challenge now is the issue of what to do with the contaminated water still in the plant. Kino said he believes it's his duty to be as open and transparent as possible with the local people, as the decommissioning process will likely be difficult.
I think there is no choice but to continue dialogue with everyone. Of course, I don't know if they understand or agree with it, but I must meet, talk, and start the conversation.
As Japan marks 10 years since the disaster, Kino has his eyes on the future of Fukushima, planning to devote the rest of his life to helping its residents recover. Aizawa Yuko, NHK World.
Those were the main stories for this hour.
Pope Francis has celebrated Mass in Erbil, declaring that Iraq will remain in his heart as he holds the last public event of his historic trip to the country. Earlier, he visited areas that had been held by Islamic State militants. A lawyer for British-Iranian woman Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe says she's been freed by Tehran after her 5-year prison sentence came to an end. However, she will have to appear in court next week in a separate case. China's foreign minister says allegations his country is carrying out genocide against Muslim ethnic Uyghurs are ridiculously absurd. A number of nations, including the US, have used the term to describe Chinese treatment of Uyghur people. Australia has suspended bilateral defence cooperation with the Burmese military in response to the coup and escalating violence in the country. In Myanmar itself, large demonstrations are continuing against the military leaders.